Oh, Darren pun tok kah? Slide tok. Paris pun nak? Okay. Hello everyone and thank you for being here today. Before I start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Irina Hanim and today we will explore a relevant topic of ESL education. So the topic was Introduction to Sociolinguistics. Next. Next. So here, as we know, language is not just about grammar or vocabulary, it's about how we use it in different social contexts. Social linguistics is the skill that help us understand the variations and how to incorporate them into our teaching practice. For example, the way we speak to our friends might be quite different from how we address a formal audience. Similarly, the way English is spoken varies from one region to another, shaped by culture, social norm, and individual experiences. When ESL students understand these dynamics, they can teach not just the language but how use it appropriately in real life situation. This knowledge enhance student communication skills, foster cultural awareness, and make our lesson much more relevant for the real world. As educator, this is the key to helping our students success both academically and socially. So next slide. Okay. In these sections, we will focus on fundamental idea in social linguistics, which is language variations. What do you mean by variation? Language variation here is it refers to the difference in how people speak and based on factors such regions, social class, ethnicity, age, or even genders. For examples, consider the difference between British English and American English. Both are formed the same language, yet they differ in vocabulary, pronunciation, and even spelling. This is clear example of regional variations. And another example could be the way teenagers use slang that's very different from formal English. So in our future later, as ESL teachers, understanding this variation is essential because our classroom are often culturally and linguistically diverse. If we fail to recognize and address these differences, students may feel misunderstood. On the other hand, by embracing language variation, we can create an inclusive, supportive environment where all students feel their linguistic background are respected and valued. Next slide. So here we have two language variation. Firstly is adaptability and secondly is linguistic diversity. Okay, here teachers can adapt the communication style to communicate diverse English proficiency levels using simplified language or visual aid for beginners and more complex language for advanced learner. Here, as educator, one of our primary responsibility is to ensure our teaching meets the needs of all our students. This means adapting our communication style to accommodate different level of English proficiency. For example, when working with beginner, we might use simple language, slow down our speech, or rely on visual aid to make our concept clear. On the other hand, advanced learners need more challenging materials, complex sentence structure, or academic language. So here, we not only enhance learning outcome but also create an environment where students feel encouraged to express themselves regardless of their language proficiency. Next is linguistic diversity. Here, it's that addressing language attitudes is equally important as students may have biases about certain dialect. Another key aspect is recognizing and celebrating linguistic diversity in the classroom. Many students come from a background where English is not their first language. They might speak in dialect or accent influenced by their native language. Sometimes, students might even face judgmental because of how they speak. So, as a teacher, we can play a crucial role in breaking down these things happens. So, next part. Next. Okay. So finally, practical applications of language variations, inclusive communication. One of one of the first step in adapting our teaching style to reflect the linguistic diversity in our classroom, we can use material that include different dialect and accents to show how students all form English are valid. We can also create activities that allow students to share words and expression from their own language by helping them to feel included and valued. And next is promoting respect. Promoting respect is language is deeply tied to identity, and students may feel self-conscious about how they speak. Uh, it's not only boost their confidence but also encourage their peers to respect linguistic diversity. Lastly is real world examples. To prepare students for the real world, we can use practical strategies in our lesson. For beginner, this might be simplifying instructions, use visual or incorporating gesture. For advanced student, we can introduce idiomatic expression, formal writing style, or role-playing activities that stimulate real-world situations. So next part, I will pass to other presenter.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next part, which is for topic two, as you guys can see here, sociolinguistic competence in context. So basically, sociolinguistic competence is essential or important for ESL teachers to manage linguistic diversity and create inclusive, respectful learning environment. It involves understanding, which is very important for the distinction between language dialect and varieties, which often reflect social identities, power dynamics, and cultural norms. As you guys can see here, there are three parts which is very essential when it comes to teaching. The firstly is recognize, secondly, understanding, and lastly, challenging. So basically, in sociolinguistic competence in ESL teaching is to build inclusive classroom through linguistic awareness. What teachers can do is diverse a classroom image with students and the teacher engage in a group activity. For me, in this topic, I discovered seven subtopic. Firstly is the language versus dialect. Political social factors often define the distinction. For example, Malay and Indonesian are linguistically similar but classified as different languages due to political and cultural factors. Firstly is the linguistic similarity. Both languages share a common base and are mutually intelligible as they originated from the same Australian roots. Political and cultural distinctions. So basically, after independence, Malaysia and Indonesia standardized their languages differently to reflect their respective national identities. Firstly, the recognize. Teacher must recognize that difference between language and dialects, like British and American English, are shaped by social and political factors rather than strict linguistic boundaries. Instead of enforcing native like accent, teachers should prioritize clarity and mutual understanding, allowing students to retain their unique linguistic identities. So, this one, I'm going to explain more about it. For the varieties of English, like what's stated here, British English and versus American English is totally different, but actually have the same meaning. For example, of the vocabulary, which is the word left and elevator, aubergine and eggplant, ladyfinger and okra. So basically, it's the same but different vocabulary. Secondly, is the spelling color versus color, COLOUR versus COLOR. For pronunciation, schedule and schedule. For the UK, schedule is steeper. US is schedule, which is faster. So practical application for this is to encourage students to recognize and respect English varieties without bias, fostering linguistic flexibility. Thirdly is the language and social context. Firstly is formality, speaking differently in a job interview. Formal context versus a casual chat. which is the informal context. For example, greeting for formal context, which is good morning. For informal context, it's hey, what's up? So vocabulary for this, formal contexts use more precise and professional language, while informal contexts favor contraction and colloquialism. For the tone, formal speech tends to be polite in structure, whereas informal speech is more relaxed and conversational. So example of the activity that can be done by teacher in the classroom is firstly is role play different scenarios. Secondly, a student greeting a friend versus greeting a teacher. First, basically, this is the example that can be done by a teacher in the classroom with their students. And thirdly, writing a formal email versus texting a peer. So the visual aid that can be used is the flow chart displaying how context influence language choices. For example, formal and informal spectrum. So basically, this kind of implication can help students for real world communication by teaching context appropriate language use. So basically, teachers have to understand when to use the casual language versus small structures form is the key for effective communication. For the fourth one is to promote inclusive English learning. So basically, it is over to clarity in speech over forcing a native accent. For example, Tamil accent English with clear grammar and vocabulary is effective. This is to recognize bias. So basically, it helps to avoid perpetuating the idea that British or American English is superior. So for the practical implication for this is to focus on intelligibility over accent, means prioritizing the ability to understand a speaker clearly, regardless of their accent, instead of pressuring the learners or students to imitate native like pronunciation. This approach recognizes that accents are a natural part of linguistic diversity and should not be viewed negatively. So, for example, of scenario for this practical implication is okay. A Chinese speaking student says, "I am going to the market for buying some vegetable." Pronunciation may have a Chinese influence, especially for the tone of the students. For example, syllable stress or vowel sounds, but the grammar and vocabulary are clear and correct. So, for teachers respond, instead of correcting the pronunciation to sound native, the teacher acknowledges their clarity. For example, teachers are going to say, "That's great, your sentence is clear and understandable. Well done." So basically, this feedback will help to encourage students to focus on the communication rather than the perfection. Like what stated here, challenge by challenging language-based biases and respecting linguistic diversity, sociolinguistic competence enables teachers to address the needs of their students more effectively. Instead of focusing on the grammar, teachers should, acknowledge their clarity, like pronunciation of the sound. The fifth is to embracing multilingualism and code switching key points. This one, multilingual learners switch languages naturally, which is called as code switching. So the benefits for this are to clarify instructions and to encourage collaborative learning between students and teachers. For example, students using their native